Good morning. This is Dr. Faustino, your professor and instructor for your PF612 Lifespan and Development Saturday class this spring semester from 8 a.m. to 11:50 a.m. This is the audio lecture for week 6, and it's going to cover chapter 12, the socio-emotional development in adolescence. I do apologize that this is not a video lecture, as my video or the video does not seem to be working at this time, so it is purely audio. And we're here to cover the outline as mentioned in the attached PowerPoint. We will cover the self, identity, and religious spiritual development, families, peers, culture and adolescent development, adolescent problems. We will try to cover as much as possible on the outline chapter, but at the same time, I will expand on giving you additional information based on what you need to know for this chapter. Again, this is for your PF612 Lifespan and Development. So let's begin. So when it comes to the self, so we're talking about adolescence. And adolescence can range from the 12 to 13, which can be considered pre-pubescent adolescence, to age 17 to 18. And by standards in our American society, we consider age 18 to be an adult as described in your typical driver's license per the DMV or state standard policies. So when we're looking at this developmental stage, we're looking at the in-between between a child, a cognitive, emotional, and behavioral stages, and also being an adult or early adulthood, which spans about 18, 19 to about, say, 25. So self-esteem, self-regulation, identity, religious spiritual development. So these are the areas that we will cover based on the adolescent stage itself. And why is that important? That's a question you should be asking. Even though that you're dealing with forensic and correctional stages and settings, we as forensic psychologists have to be mindful of this stage of development because this is where a lot of mistakes and dysfunctions happen behaviorally. And this is where some of you may want to specialize or treat or even do your practicum and internship seeing adolescents who are having behavioral problems. So when it comes to that, you're going to be working with juvenile halls and also based on inpatient, outpatient, and also the jails and prison settings. Not so much prison, but more on, adolescents, juvenile, medium correctional setting. So we're dealing with instability or uncertainty when it comes to self-esteem. And we're looking at that stage where they kind of are not completely sure yet of the self-regulation based on cognitive and emotional self-regulation. So they're kind of finding their way into finding those emotions that are confusing and also very, very distracting and very, very not just confusing, but a lot of the time they don't know what to do with those emotions. And the thing about the self-regulation is it does not come automatically. So basically what you're seeing is that, feelings of crushes, towards the opposite sex, or feeling like in love, or feeling anger, they don't know where exactly it's coming from. So a lot of that has to do with developing that self-identity. But through development of self-identity, you're seeing peer identity. So their peer groups has a lot to do with their development of self-identity. who they hang out with, who are their friends or their best friends, who do they most talk about their problems and issues. So there's a kind of like a deviation of, approaching first during childhood is the parents or parent. Now they're moving towards peers because it's relatable that these feelings are, acknowledged and validated by their own peers. Whereas the parents become that, detachment, figures to, to say that, what, my parents don't understand me anymore. I'm 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and they don't know what I'm going through. Even though as parents yourself or as adults, we went through the same stages. But this is how adolescents think, is that they're moving away from dependency, or codependency to independence. And they're not quite sure about how to go about that. So they rely on peers as a reflection of their own self-identity. So we'll talk more about that too. And then also on top of that is the development of morality. And morality develops during childhood. We talked about this in week 4. But in week 6, as adolescents develop, so there is that separate religious spiritual development that could be compatible to their parents or parent. But at the same time, they could start deviating away to say, you know what, I'm going to find my own belief system, my own religion. So this is my own independence. Both being dependent towards the parent or guardian, but at the same time, or even families, but at the same time, I am my own self being. So that dependency and interdependence, as well as the independence, is a reflection of their personal growth as an adolescent. So it's important to acknowledge that, because when you're seeing, say, for example, behavioral disturbed adolescents, let's say in a correctional juvenile hall setting, or even through the court setting. So what you're seeing is that a lot of the time they follow their peers. They see what's happening in social media because it's validation of their own identity. They have hundreds and thousands of friends as followers, or they're influenced by followers or influencers. And this is just an example. But this is a reflection of what's happening in their own identity as they develop through it. Now that it's not, and during adolescence, personality and development of identity is not crystallized. It's a constantly static, fluid is a better word to use. As they develop through that, it keeps changing, molding, evolving. So it's not solidified in stone yet. So that's kind of what you're going to see is the behavioral disturbance. If we go backwards based on, say, cognitive therapy and CBT, what you're really seeing is if you go backwards, the behavioral dysfunction is a good reflection of their own emotional dysregulation, the inability to control and master those feelings, and at the same time go backwards even more, those reflections of their dysfunctional thoughts. So as they develop through it, it starts crystallizing through early, adulthood. Now it could happen earlier. But, this is that stage of development where there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion. So we need to be mindful of that. So again, let's break it down even more. A lot of the self-identity is met with validation from others and self-validation, meaning, am I good enough to be a person? Am I strong enough? What are my weaknesses? How do I get validated for my own narcissistic self? So that's part of that adolescence, is that this is the primal stage when narcissism really is at its foremost. So it's really important that, we acknowledge that narcissism is pretty much standardized and normalized, not so much too dysfunctional, but also at the same time, it's almost permittable. So if you want to look at it from that perspective. But at the same time, based on the picture here on the PowerPoint, you're also looking at, the good self and the bad self. This is where morality is really tested. the righteousness, the Machiavellian parts of the self. So what I do bad enough that I break laws of society, and some of them will serve time and get arrested, or is it just testing the limits of the parents' boundaries? Rules that's set by families, by parents, and also by the community and society. So it's important to recognize this duality amongst adolescents. And this is something we ourselves went through, but different generations. That's something that you need to acknowledge and think about and also understand that as we develop this through different generations, and right now we are at millennials and Gen Z, and then we have the newest ones that's, still in their baby stages, which is the Gen Alpha. But these are the development of these adolescents that every generation has gone through. But society do make changes and make demands so that there are slight, minute differences between generations. And it's a reflection of our own society as well. So we'll talk more about this too as well. So in self-esteem, we're talking about the self-esteem of girls declines more during adolescence. Self-esteem reflects perception that do not always match reality. For example, one's perception of one's own intelligence or attractiveness. So when we're looking at, and some of you can even kind of, attest to this, based on your own adolescence, that the self-esteem of girls declines more during adolescence is because there's a lot of that uncertainty, a lot of that confusion about social cues. Did that guy look at me and he likes me? Or why is my statement about, that I like this boy not getting picked up? Why am I being ignored? So there's a lot of that, positive and negative behaviors and social cues that a lot of them are navigating through. And there's really no spoken rules about these things. Adolescents, like the way we did, just have to go through this based on social cues, based on how the society and the community interprets this. And a lot of that has to do with failure. No one really tells these adolescents that, well, you're going to fail all the time, or you're going to succeed most of the time, and so forth. So it's a trial by error. So a lot of the time when girls are getting shot down, just like boys, it wounds their self-esteem, and they're doubting themselves, and they're feeling depressed and anxious and despair, and this is where we have to step in and assess these adolescents to make sure that there's no high risk for suicide or acting out or behavioral disturbance that's out of hand. So the self-esteem is very central to adolescence. And again, this example, one's perception of one's own intelligence or attractiveness based on validation from others. And that's what kind of social media is giving our adolescents these days, is the ability of others to 100,000, girls are telling one girl that she's like, 10 out of 10 in beauty, when in reality she could be just like a 7 or 8, a rating by the community or by society standard. So it boosts a self-esteem when others are telling her, even though it's not realistic. So the development of unrealistic expectation is very marked in this developmental stage. So self-esteem may refer to accurate, justified perceptions, but it could also indicate an unwarranted sense of superiority. So we just kind of talked about that. This narcissism, a self-centered and self-concerned approach towards others. Now, I caution every single one of you who are going to be future psychologists that, narcissistic personality disorder in cluster B in the personality disorders based on the DSM-5 TR that we use to diagnose first and foremost, avoid diagnosing any kind of personality disorders, including narcissistic personality disorders, which is NPD, on any adolescents. During the adolescent stage, and you will hear me if you hear me talk about this in a DSM class or the pathology class, is that the development of the personality during assessment, during adolescent stage, during adolescent stage, is constantly evolving and changing. We do not, based on the DSM-5, diagnose any personality disorder until they hit the age of 18. Now, that could change in the future, but between 12 to 18, adolescents are still developing their personality. So do avoid making any diagnosis. Okay? So back to narcissism. A self-centered and self-concerned approach towards others, meaning this is normal to develop during adolescent stage. They're entitled, they're grandiose, they feel that they are the center of the universe, they cannot do anything wrong, they feel superior, and so on and so on and so forth. This is normal, okay? Because as they develop towards adulthood, reality fights back. I'm sorry to say that, okay? There's the individual who's functioning in a great society, but the majority rules, okay? That means the majority of people who went through the same stage have developed such out of the narcissism or minimize the narcissism by the time they get out of the adolescent stage. So we'll talk again more and more about this. So this self-regulation, which is more in touch with emotional self-regulation, is important to many aspects of adolescent lives. So we're talking about academic achievement. So high school, typical, that they go through these stages in high school. They have to go to classes, they have to perform admirably as much as possible, get high grades if they want to go to college. So academic achievement is very important in our society, okay? Good health habits, and this is where you'll see a very different aspect of adolescence. And again, you may be aware of this yourself because you're all young adults in this class. But when you're looking at good health habits, this is the time that adolescents, have their growth spurts, start having body hair, start having body odor, start having, facial features, okay? And many other physical attributes that changes their childhood and bodily physicality to now they have a different perspective of themselves. So when the growth change, there is also a change in how they see themselves in the mirror. So this good healthy habits is important. They actually start showering, using body spray, shaving, in dressing more appropriately to their specific age group. They wear perfume and cologne. So they're more to entertain other adolescents rather than they're entertaining their parents. So they develop these habits based on what they see in social media, what they see in the media, also what they see of their peers or their peer groups. So it's important that they develop these good healthy habits because part of this is attracting other adolescents. This is where they have this groupings or coalitions with other peers that they like, and they have the same values. And then also at the same time, this is where dating begins. This is where liking begins. This is where crushes and falling in love and all of these things develop. So they have to develop this good healthy habits. And that also includes good eating healthy habits. The eating habits, they're more, before it was just junk food and anything their parents gave them. Now they can have both. they're eating healthier, salads and, fishes and more of these, healthy habits. And also they could also go with their peer groups and they're eating greasy foods like burgers and hot dogs and all of these things. So again, it's a learning curve as they do these things through this development in the next 4 or 5 years. So avoiding risky behaviors, the self-regulation, they know that sometimes they have this feeling or thoughts of feeling invulnerable. But at the same time, they're taking higher risk behaviors, drug addictions or using drugs, introduction to alcohol or drinking in parties and social occasions and so forth. So they're not quite young adults yet, but they're now experimenting on these risky behaviors. So avoiding risky behaviors could be mandated by their parents, their families, their siblings, but also their peers. So it's important that, I don't want to take a risk, but at the same time, you're also looking at components of like, hey, you know what, I'm starting to have sex, and also that, having, maybe one or two sexual partners and so forth. So they're learning about STIs or STDs and also, high risk behaviors of sexual contacts. And they're hearing other peers getting HIVs and hepatitis and all of the HPVs and all of these other things, which could be damaging. But remember that this is the stage of experiment. But at the same time, this is the stage of awareness. They're aware of what their body is going through, but they're also aware that what other things out there that what they were protected against during childhood. And now they're being aware that, hey, social media, my peers and TikTok and Instagram and, are talking about, higher risk of STIs, if you do this and you do that. So they're minimizing the risky behaviors, but again, they're still taking some kind of risk at the same time. So, moving on. A key component is effortful control, which involves inhibiting impulses. So this is the part, as children, we're kind of impulsive. But as adolescents, we're now more cognitive about, like, if I do this, this could happen. Or my peers could tell me not to do that. And I want to be a part of a peer group. Because adolescence is a hugely controlled group of adolescents. You won't see a lot of adolescents out there. And maybe there's very rarely that they do exist. And some. But you will see that a lot of adolescents want to belong. They want to be part of some group. And when we're talking about some kind of group, they want to be part of that group that have the same values and control that others have. And they want to be part of that social group. So inhibiting impulses. So before, they used to just do whatever they want, like I said a second ago. But now they're like, well, it's Sunday night and I know some peers are telling me we should go to a party, but I have finals on Monday. And, again, they're having to now start looking at making good decisions or bad decisions, either way. But again, it's about having to actually pause and think of the consequences, what should happen if I decide to do A versus B or C. So again, there are differences with that too. And, not engaging in destructive behavior. So they may find from other peers, or it's kind of like hearsay, a word of mouth from other social groups. Like, look what happened with this teenager or this adolescent who's now arrested, who's in juvie hall, who is in drug rehab and so forth. So do I really want to do that? So there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions now about their own behavior. Well, I have a good future. I want to go to college, and I want to become this doctor or lawyer or engineer or so, whatever. And I don't want to do that because it's going to ruin my future. So they're actually thinking about consequences. So it will divert them from engaging in destructive behavior. Focusing and maintaining attention despite distraction. So again, a lot of that has to do with setting boundaries, building the strength to, through examinations, quizzes, tests in high school, different forms and different classes. So we're actually having to provide them with the structure of boundaries, and they're having to learn that more and more and more. So they're now more focused on what they need to do. So in children, It's not quite, with children, they're more all over the place. By the time they hit adolescence and they're learning this, especially towards the later adolescence, they're more equipped with this coping skill, this development skill. Initiating and completing tasks that have a long-term value, even if they may seem unpleasant. So that means some of these adolescents, initiating and completing tasks that, some of them start working. They know that, hey, it's not about just making money, but it's about getting the experience, having that long-term value that, hey, this is my work ethics. I'm starting to learn that I have to work 3 days a week working for McDonald's or working for Chick-fil-A. I'm going to be a cashier. I'm going to be serving food, or, cleaning the bathroom, whatever. Even though it's unpleasant, they're getting to know the other side of, hey, this is what it takes to be an adult, but also this is contributing to my skills to say, hey, I'm strong enough to go through this. So in the long term, that I will actually have more value to say, hey, I know how to work a 9 to 5, 8 to 4, even part-time or so. In the future, this is what I want to do, and this is my work ethics. So the development of self-ethics, on top of that is work ethics. So it's important to start continuing to develop these ethics that we have, because in the long term, that's kind of what we need, because part of that is still the structure and boundaries that we learn throughout adolescence. This identity is all separate. They're all in pieces that contribute to a greater identity, a self-identity. So identity is a self-portrait composed of many pieces and domains. So a vocational career identity that I just mentioned, hey, you know what? At 16, I am 1 year into working at McDonald's. Hey, I can do this. I know how to do this now. I know how to do my job, but yet I still am a high school student. I'm still a daughter or a son. I'm learning how to develop my identity through vocation. And then they also start learning about political identity, the politics that they start learning that we ignored as kids because it's nothing to do with us. But now our peers have all their own political ideologies. So we develop that as well. That now it's like, well, am I really one party versus another? So what are my belief systems? So that goes directly correlated to our own belief system. And a lot of the time, the adolescent's belief system is a function of the parents' belief system, or they can create their own. So that's part of that too. And political identities do change over time for a majority of people. But then there's also the religious identity, which is similar to that, because when you are a child having to go with your family, to church, to mosque, to, different kinds of religious, affiliation and different kind of worships and so forth, places of worship. So we kind of tend to follow what the family and the parents are, but also at the same time, they can create their own. So again, and relationship identity is actually the more varied, the more diverse of all. Because the relationship identity is we have a relationship with our guardian, our parent or our parents, our siblings, our aunts and uncles, our godparents, our grandparents, and so forth. But then you start developing that adolescent peer group, so your friends, your social circle. But at the same time, you also have your best friends, and then you have the people that you really like, that you have an attraction to, whether it's through social media or actually face to face. So you start developing that, and those are part of the nuances, the new things that we start developing. That it strengthens us, that we know how to develop, we know how to read social cues as an adolescent, and it gets better through age. Now, achievement and intellectual identity is directly correlated to your academics and to your learning experiences in schools. So, are you a top-notch student? Are you an average student? Are you a student really who don't care for, for classes at all? So that's tied into your intelligence. And intelligence, it has very little to do with, academic intelligence, which is very different. It could be streetwise or street intelligence because a lot of people may not want to go to school, So a lot of the time, working in a correctional setting, you'll see juveniles who barely finish fifth grade or get their GED, and because they're not interested, they're not motivated with having to be an A student, having to go to college. It's not for them. So achievement, what kind of achievement, based on our assessment, what kind of achievement have they had based on their short life, as an adolescent? So what does that mean? Intelligence or intellectual identity. Okay. Sexual identity is part of relationship identity. And sexual identity is the emergence of a sexual being. So what does that mean? Being sexual, so feelings change, bodies, physical bodies change, there is attraction to other adolescents and so forth. So what does that mean? How do you navigate through that? How do you navigate through those urges, sexual urges that's like, want to go out with that person or you want to have sex, at that age, at a specific age and so forth. What does that mean? So that's part of that too, is through that development. But at the same time, kind of what I said earlier, is that what does it mean when you're having to learn that you're having, or first time you're having sex, do you wear condoms and protection for girls and boys? What's the risk of HIV infection or hepatitis? So what kind of sexual behavior do my peers do? A lot of questions are asked and they check it out with their peers or they find resources. In the old days, we used to just go, find books and talk to parents. And some adolescents still do. But these days, what I'm seeing is a lot of adolescents rely on social media to validate what their questions are. So it's important to get those answers. Cultural ethnic identity has been there from the beginning. So that may have anything to do with not only race and ethnicity, but also what are those stereotypes with others, are they part of a multi-group of adolescents? Or maybe based on their background and communities and all of that. Maybe they're not as multi-background as they would like to be and all of that. But social media has made the world smaller. So that means that we are able to reach out to other people at different countries and different continents and different states of this country and so forth and experience that, hey, these same people who are my age also think the same, even though we are different in language or culture, or maybe it's the same culture but different language. So they reach out, or they're being sought out by other people of the same age group. So again, it's very, very important for us to acknowledge that we may think of adolescence in forensics as pathology, but we also have to think where it comes from. Where is it stemming from? So it's important to acknowledge that this is important, that this is where it all starts. Interest. What are their interests? What are they interested in? What are their hobbies? So it's important to acknowledge that it's like, hey, you know what? I'm into gaming, or I'm into, going out and partying and eating out all the time, or we just hang out in the parks and the beaches and all of these things. So what are those interests? And a lot of that time, the same group that these peers hang out with and socialize with have the same interests. So what are those interests? And we want to ask those things. And again, we talked about personality, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. We will cover it more. Physical identity, what is that? Part of that physical identity could be related to their functionality, physicality too. Oh, I'm a football player. I'm a cheerleader. I'm a basketball player. I'm a tennis player. I'm into arts, and theater in school and, in high school and all of that. What is that? What is that physical identity? Okay. It could even also translate to their vocational career identity. Oh, I'm a Chick-fil-A worker, or I work at Walmart, and all of that. So what is that, right? So it translates to that as well. So again, do you see how multivariate this identity is? And what is that social identity, which we've been covering throughout this the whole time? So is it based on social media? Is it based on their, IG and, Instagram or TikTok or, other social medias that they're part of and so forth? Is it a dating app? So they're dating to explore those things as well, So what are those things? And we would ask those questions as well. So when it comes to identity, so Eric Erickson's 8 stages of development here. So we're looking at the first 3 or 4 for children, and now we're looking at 4 and 5, maybe definitely the fifth developmental stage based on Eric Erickson's is identity versus identity confusion. And the search for identity is aided by the psychosocial moratorium, the gap between childhood security and adult autonomy. So this identity versus identity or a confusion. So the solidification of identity is not quite there yet because there are uncertainty and confusion about this, as I said earlier. But then again, that part of that confusion is that it's still developing. Oh, I like this traits of someone else, but I don't like this from that same person, So again, they're picking and choosing which ones they prefer and like, and they do the same thing with their social circles. They may not have 100 people. They may have a very close, small, tight-knit group of people that they really associate with because that identity is a good reflection of the group identity, as well as the family identity as well. So, adolescents experiment with different roles and personality. So they know they're a daughter and a son. They're a granddaughter. There are their siblings. They could be the oldest, the youngest, the middle. Okay, but then the different roles within the group, within their social group, is very, very unique. They could be the quiet person. They could be the person who is the mature, individual who gives guidance to the other, adolescents in their age group. So what is that role? Are they the placater? Are they the eager, over eager friend? Are they the rescuer? What is that role that they fulfill within their social groups at the same time? And personalities develop throughout. And adolescents who cope with conflicting identities emerge with a new sense of self. So again, it's both negative and positive. It's not primarily negative, it's not primarily positive, but at the same time, there's going to be a new self that develop by the time they hit 17, 18, 19 years old, because they're being pushed towards early adulthood. They know that time goes forward. They know that they have no choice and they cannot stop being a child or adolescent. And they have to move towards the end of adolescence so that they continue to grow as a person. Social groups changes, their identity changes, and they may keep the same friends or some, and when a lot of adolescents go to college, they lose contact with some of their friends. And then they may reconnect again somewhere down the line. But again, adolescents who do not successfully resolve the identity crisis suffer identity confusion. They don't know how to navigate. In fact, one of the most common things we see in adolescence is that their groups may be fragmented, or they may not have a lot of friends who's giving them guidance. Their parents are not there. Maybe they're always working, maybe they're absent, who knows? But they're not there to provide guidance. And a lot of these adolescents need guidance. They seek out guidance even though they're not directly asking us. They will seek out these guidance. What are these guidance? Who is giving it to them? What advice are they being given? And sometimes it doesn't have to be positive. It could be a negative influencer or a negative person in their life who's giving the negative, values, and that's kind of what they're going to follow. And they don't know any better. Because at this stage, adolescents, they don't like questioning, or they don't have, or may have, they don't have the capacity to really confront and directly question what's being given to them. They just follow based on what they want, what they need to validate that experience, to validate that role that they're filling. So a lot of the time, they may not question these things. How many times have I encountered adolescents in juvenile halls, or even, young adolescents in prison that literally they're just followers. They just follow what they're being told, because the identity is still emerging. It's still developing. So again, we have to be patient with these individuals, but we do have to question what these things are, the identity and the confusion. So a lot of the time it's asking the most simplest question. Tell me who you are. That's a very normal question to ask of any adolescents. Tell me who you are. Tell me what you are. Not only that, tell me what you like, what you dislike. What things do you do that you love doing, that you don't like doing at all? These are the kind of things that they will tell us about based on their experiences. But remember, it's limited. You're not looking at a 60-year experience. You're looking at a 14, 15, 16-year experience based on their worldview, how they see the world through the adolescent eyes. The developmental changes. Most significantly, the individual can now sort through and synthesize childhood identities to construct a path towards maturity. So again, they're sorting through childhood. As a child, I used to like this, but now I'm an adolescent. I'm a teenager. I don't need to do that. That's too childish. My friends and I don't do that. But we do this instead. It could be very similar or it could be completely different. So they're going to sort through what they like and don't like, but it needs to be compatible to their developmental adolescent stage. So they're going to start leaving these childhood behaviors and, play activities and, again, it's too immature and that's not what I do anymore and so forth. So it's part of that development of an adolescent identity. Now, James Marcia classifies individuals at this stage based on existence and extent of this crisis or commitment. During adolescent stage, crisis is more evident, more apparent, more visible in their eyes. And crisis, and again, kind of cautioning each and every one of you future psychologists in this class. Crisis is something that we as psychologists need to have a good understanding. So I'm going to talk about this off the topic here for a second. When it comes to crisis, a lot of clients come to us in crisis mode. When I'm talking about crisis mode, crisis right here, just as similar to what this described, is a period of identity development during which the adolescent is exploring alternatives. But crisis can also be interpreted by the psychologist as they need something. They're in crisis mode, whatever that language or interpretation could be for an adolescent client, that they need emergency services right here and now. Okay? And a very typical example that I can give you in crisis and therapy is a client comes to you, an adolescent clients come to you for therapy and ask, well, my boyfriend broke up with me and I'm so depressed right now, I'm in crisis. Is that really a crisis? From your point of view as a psychologist, and I'm putting you in the role of a psychologist here, is that a crisis? Or is that an issue, a concern that we can talk about in therapy? Or based on how they see that problem, it is a crisis for them. Do you see the disparity? Do you see the discontinuity of how we see things versus how an adolescent client may see things? That's big. That's a big difference. To me, a crisis is you're suicidal. To me, you're a crisis because you're dying. You were just given an HIV diagnosis. You're in crisis because right now you're short of time and it's an emergency and we need to get a hold of medical and psychology or us doing interventions at this very moment. That's a crisis. But a lot of clients don't understand what a crisis is. They're basing the crisis on how they feel, that they need immediate services. So that's something you need to decide for yourself. What is a crisis? So again, based on this, an adolescent can come up to you in therapy and seek your services based on it's a crisis. But a crisis here is a period of identity development during which the adolescent is exploring alternative. So this is not the same crisis that I'm mentioning. So there are different versions of what a crisis could mean. But in this sense, a period of identity which the adolescent is exploring alternatives. So I'm no longer the 13, 14-year-old that I was previously. A few years ago, I was a child. Now I'm 16, 17. It's a big difference in identity between a 13 and 14 and a 16 and 17-year-old, even though they're in the same developmental adolescence period. So again, there are movements towards evolving identity here. And then the commitment part is a personal investment in identity. They invest a lot based on social peer relationships and family relationships and family identity, that they start molding that identity into, hey, I'm going to invest my work ethics into this, my academic ethics, that I do want to go to college. I want to become a lawyer. I want to become an engineer, a doctor. I'm molding myself towards that. I'm a hard worker. I make do with my promises and so forth like that. I'm not going to lie. So there is a morality involved with this. There's an integrity development here. So this personal investment in commitment towards oneself is a development that will literally lock in by the time they become hitting their early adulthood, and then it will last for the rest of their life, because part of that commitment is liking oneself. Part of that commitment is loving who they are. This is who they are. This is who they're comfortable with under their own skin. So it's important that they like and love who they are, and that's who they become. So it's important to acknowledge that. So let's move a little bit more, and then we're gonna be taking a break shortly here. Marcia, or Jane Marcia's 4 statuses of identity. So we all, we may be focused on Erik Erikson's, but there are other masters of development in psychology. James Marcia is one of them. Identity diffusion. Individuals who have not experienced a crisis. Maybe they're too young. Okay, maybe they're too protected by their parents. Maybe they're not too much on social media or influenced by their peers. Okay, there's no commitment. So they've yet to hit that stage where they are in crisis, or they are, confronted by social situations that they feel stressed about or depressed about, such as getting turned down for a date, or say a junior prom or so forth like that. So there's going to be identity diffusion because it's just beginning. Identity foreclosure. Those who made a commitment but have not experienced a crisis. So do you see how these stages go? It goes from one to the next, to the next, to the next. Identity moratorium. Those who are in the midst of a crisis. And again, this is that development, the integrity. But their commitments are either absent or vaguely defined. So this is that middle ground. That foreclosure and moratorium is the middle ground of the identity development here. And the identity achievement. Those who have undergone a crisis have made a commitment. I'm better as a person, as a teenager, as a male or female teenager, adolescent, because I went through breakups. I'm stronger. I know how to respond to this. I know what it feels like to work 5 days a week during the summer to earn money, but also, pay, start saving for my college education. So they start going through these crises, this development of crisis identification and, identity, and they're making a commitment now. So it starts solidifying that identity. So from diffusion to foreclosure to moratorium to achievement, these are the identities that James Marcia have noticed on any adolescence, despite culture, despite ethnicity or race. Okay? In our society, and most societies out there, we pretty much have similarities and differences as well. So the slide right here on identity, where it says, and again, it makes it easier for you to realize the crisis and commitment stages based on, again, the model here of identity diffusion, identity foreclosure, identity moratorium, and identity achievement. So it goes from absent to absent present to present to absent to present and present. So these are the four stages that James Marcia, talked about that makes a difference in our understanding of what these adolescents go through. So it's important for us to really learn about these things, but also apply this as you're talking and seeing and treating an adolescent client in your practice, okay, or in your practicum, or your internship. So let's talk one or two more slides. Emerging adolescence or adulthood and beyond. So again, part of our cycle, our human cycle, is that we go from childhood to adolescence to early adulthood. And then there's also later on that we're going to talk about not early middlehood or middle adulthood, then middle adulthood, and then also young, older generation adulthood, and then older adulthood. There are several stages of these things. So emerging adulthood and beyond, key changes in identity as they move from adolescence, older adolescence to young adulthood. Key changes in identity because things change, work habit changes. You're not in high school anymore. This is your first semester in, say, vocational school or college, university, or, associate degree, community college and so forth. There's going to be a new switch, maturity level, and key changes in this identity are more likely to take place in emerging adulthood or later than adolescence. So we're not quite there yet. We're still talking about adolescence, but it's that transition period. College can have a significant effects. I see this all the time, including increased complexity in reasoning and wide range of experiences. Having childhood experience is not the same thing as having high school friends and social groups. It's not the same thing as having college friends and social groups because there are different maturity levels on each stages. So having that complexity in reasoning, not only about social dating and social groups and so forth like that, but new experiences. Living on your own in college, you're in a dorm. Having to drive, by yourself without your parents anymore. And, getting that authority, getting that confidence that, you have to do things on your own. So this complexity in reasoning is part of the development also in your prefrontal cortex as human beings. That because we're the last, and again, I mentioned this before, we're one of the few species that has a prefrontal cortex. Most animals don't have a prefrontal cortex because your reasoning lies in your prefrontal cortex. It's smack in front of your, frontal lobe here, in your skull, in your head. So the more we gain experiences, the more that we, especially more positive experiences and experiences, the more that your reasoning starts more mature. Note that identity does not remain stable throughout life. There are changes. Again, you have to see the human development as a push and a pull. There's a push that we have to continue, but then there's a pull that says, I'm not ready to go to that next step yet. And part of that is the identity to say, I'm going too fast. Okay? Maybe I need to slow down, or maybe, I just need to go on my own pace as an adolescent. So the identity has changes throughout, even through the adolescent changes. But throughout human development, we have this push and pull. Okay, there are negative experiences given through us, but at the same time we push through that. So our adversity, our resiliency increases based on our maturity level. So many follow this quote mama cycle. So from moratorium to achievement to moratorium to achievement. So this is the last four of the James Marsh's identity development right here. So this switch back and forth is actually expected. Okay? But the first identity should not be expected to be the final product. It's yet to develop completely. Okay? And if I may say so, there's really no final product. Okay? You can't see it as just like the final product. This is who you are, because throughout human development, early adulthood, adulthood and all of that, we continue to develop. We continue to learn, to experience new things, both positive and negative. And we go through that, whether we like it or not. We can't stop time. We can't stop progress. We can't stop evolution. So it's important to recognize that as a psychologist, that this is what this person is going through. Are they stuck in this mode? How many times have I seen clients who are early adulthood, but they're really stagnant and stuck in a late adolescence? They just refuse to grow up. Okay, and I know people who are older than that. And again, that's part of that, is that some people may or may not be ready to continue their development. So they want to hold off on it as much as possible and continue to be stuck in that development for as long as possible. But again, you have to take this for the grain of salt that it is, that every client is different from every other client that you're going to see, including one adolescent versus the next, versus the next, versus the next. Okay? So, let me hold off for a second here. Let me take a quick time out. Give you a break here. Grab your coffee, take a break, whatever you need to do. And I'll come back, and then we'll resume this again. All right? Thank you. All right. We are back. So let's move to our part 2 of our audio lecture for week 6. So we are now going to move on with talking about cultural and ethnic identity. Identity developed as influence or is influenced by culture and ethnicity. So ethnic identity, an enduring aspect of the self that includes a sense of membership in an ethnic group and the attitudes and feelings as well as values related to that membership. So many adolescents develop a bicultural identity based on both their ethnic group and the majority group culture. So think of it as, and every member of our human group society, adolescent, has culture. All right. Despite skin color, everybody has a culture. And we're talking about a family culture where a person belongs in that particular family, and a community culture, which is part of that ethnic group culture that everybody belongs to. So despite skin color, despite race, and everybody would love to think that culture is just based on skin color, based on your brown skin, your black skin, all of that, even red skin for, and again, I'm using those color words because it doesn't fully describe our own culture within. So when I talk to Native Americans, even young adults, and some of them are just literally turning 18 when they're in prison, everybody thinks that it's a red culture, the red skin and all of that, or you're Hispanic, or you're Asian, you're brown culture and all of these things, and African Americans as well as Caucasians, which the society considers white and all of that. So, but everybody has a bicultural identity. And we don't ask enough of our adolescent clients what that bicultural identity is based on. Based on what family you came from, what are the generational heritage values that you carry, in your family that is passed on to you. So when we're thinking about ethnic identity, we're thinking about that bicultural identity that a lot of people, even from the beginning, from the get-go, from the very beginning when they were first raised, So what about, how would you consider an adolescent client who is from a multicultural family? that they were adopted, or you have hybrid families where one parent is from a different racial origin than the other parent. How do you identify with that in terms of multiculturalism? So that's kind of what we're talking about, is what is that ethnic identity? And it doesn't have to be just minorities. We have to expand, as psychologists, we have to expand our own perceptions and perspective on bicultural identity of these clients. So here, pride in one's ethnic identity group and the strong ethnic identity and the values and the morals and all of these other things that's embedded within, and the connections that has positive outcomes. How do they celebrate their traditions? How do they celebrate their ethnicity? Despite, like I said, despite skin color, how do they celebrate that? And how do we celebrate that with them? So a lot of psychologists don't go far enough when we actually discuss these things, with a client, because we just think about the negativity that they bring into therapy. When in fact, the client, even the adolescent client, has so much more within that experiences, that identity within. So it's influenced by positive diverse friendship. So we have to celebrate those things. So don't think of therapy as like just problem solving, because we are more than that. Therapy is much more than that. There has to be a balance between looking at, well, you have negative issues and negative problems that you want to talk to me about. Whether it is individual or family or couples, or, they're part of a family, and maybe there's a group of adolescent therapy that you're doing. So we need to also celebrate the positivity and what they bring into therapy. What is that bicultural identity that they can bring into light, that we can start celebrating and use as solutions to help resolve the problems? So these are the kind of things that I want you guys to be aware of, because it's important that we need to think about how to look at those two different perspectives when seeing these adolescent clients. So identity development and the digital environment. Social media platforms. We're talking about TikTok, talking about Facebook from the older generation. We're talking about IG, Instagram, and other social medias as well that these adolescent clients use day in, day out. And there's going to be in the future, there's going to be more of those things, X, that used to be Twitter and all of that. So what are these social media platforms? And they have introduced ways for youth, the adolescents, to express and explore their identity. The explosion of social media, that we used to just have friends in the neighborhood. Now these adolescents have friends any part of this planet that they can associate with, that they can connect with, that they can validate their experiences. Now the world is smaller, because despite language barrier, and then we have apps now, we have programs that literally can translate, from one language to the next, or into English instantaneously, casting themselves as positive on their digital experiences and their devices. So think about, have you ever asked an adolescent client? And if you haven't, ask anyway. Have you ever asked an adolescent client, how much time do you spend on social media connecting with your friends? So validating their experiences because they validate yours. So it's a two-way street here. Post attractive photos and videos of themselves, friends, and family. Now, what are the dangers here that we have to be mindful, because they're adolescents, and I think the older adolescents are more aware of this than the younger adolescents, are the consequences of posting, sexually explicit picture. Remember what we talked about, and maybe we haven't talked about it yet here, but in my other classes, I talk about this all the time, that state laws are kind of behind, some of these policies which regards to exchanging new photos of adolescents. Adolescents are not fully grown adults. They have immature mindsets, and they're trying to develop that to become good citizens, good adults. But they're not quite there yet. So when they're exchanging photos, especially sexually explicit photos, and I hear about this all the time, OnlyFans, that they're getting a lot of money. But they're selling themselves, sending photos and all of these things which people pay for. Is that prostitution? Could that bite them in the back, in the near future? Possibly. But there are state laws. In the state of California, there is a state law that states that if you're exchanging pictures and you get caught, okay, exchanging pictures, sending pictures, especially sending pictures and or receiving pictures, okay, that is not of an adult, you can be charged with a sex crime or be titled as sex offender. Now, once that's out in the public, you cannot erase it. There's no way you can catch every possible internet, post out there that you can actually remove the title of sex offender. So once that's out, there's a danger that these people, these adolescents, may ruin their future. But again, a lot of these immature mindset don't have the capacity to think about future consequences. So again, posting attractive photos, which is great, because they need to be validated. That narcissism within themselves needs to be validated because they need to know amongst their friends of friends of friends, that, what, I am accepted, that I am normal like everybody else, that I am attractive, that I am handsome, that people like me and all of that. So there's that constant need for validation. Describing themselves in idealistic ways. So that's also as equally important, that they have skills and features and traits that people will like. Because part of adolescence is what? Making special connections, correct? When you make special connections, you're looking for not exactly a potential mate for the future, but you're looking for that special connection that they will be like and they will like other people. And that's part of human nature to do that. Okay? Somewhere down the line, they may get married, have families, or maybe just have good careers and, all of that. But again, the future's not quite set yet. But during adolescent stage, it's a time for that experiment. It's a time to grow as a person, to find yourself. So it's important to, to figure out how to go about that. So continually edit and rework their online self-portrait. So, again, I'm not privy to most adolescent phones out there, but the ones I've seen and the ones that's been shared with me, we're talking about dozens, if not hundreds of photos that's constantly changing. Self-photos, selfies is what we call them. Self-portraits of their best profile to put it out there to friends and families and to other people to be like and all of these things. So again, there is a need for that constant validation because it feeds their ego, their narcissism, which is good in some ways. Narcissism doesn't have to be bad all the time. So we need to uncover these things and talk about it, and even sometimes in therapy, complement them. If it's good and it's benefiting them and it's not hurting others, why not compliment the adolescent client, right? So these platforms provide the opportunity for public feedback, which, as in the offline world, is not always positive. When you put yourself out there, and I think a lot of people may or may not do that, especially adolescents, they take a risk. When you take a risk, not only are you going to get positive feedback, but you're also, and a lot of kids don't understand this, a lot of teenagers don't understand this, you're going to get criticism. I don't like your body fat, or I don't like the way you look, and you look immature, and whatever else negative criticism. It's going to be a blow to their ego, to their narcissism. So what happens is now in their mind there's a fight to say, hey, you don't like me, I don't like you, and there's going to be some criticism forwarded back. And a lot of these comments are people they probably don't even know. So again, a lot of that, part of that as psychologists, is we have to provide psychoeducation, not only to the parents of the adolescent during family therapy, but also to the adolescent if you have an adolescent client. That psychoeducation is a good part of it because they need to understand. Remember that if you have an adolescent client and you're the psychologist, even though, you're not far off from in terms of age, maybe 10 or less years difference between you and the adolescent, is that you have an authoritative standpoint. When you're being a psychologist with these clients who is younger than you, there's an authority that you impose, that you possess during therapy. And that's part of being a psychologist. So religious spiritual development that we talked about briefly already. So when we're talking about this, it's important to many religious interests among adolescents have declined in the 21st century. We know that. A lot of people don't go to churches and and mosque and other worship, places of worship and so forth like that. So again, is it based on loss of beliefs? Maybe, maybe not. Is it because that teenagers are more busier with their schedules? Possibly. We don't know, and we might as well ask. So assess in terms of frequency of prayer, discussion of teachings, and deciding moral actions for religious reasons, along with the overall importance of religion in everyday life. Adolescent girls are more religious than adolescent boys. Not so far off, but again, it's almost even. They just happen to have more. But it depends also on the client that you're seeing. Some may be more and some may be less religious. And, but again, a lot of people confuse, even psychologists confuse the issue of religion versus spirituality. Where spirituality is much more of a belief system. Religion is a set of organized spiritual belief system, like Catholicism, Buddhism, Islam, Taoism, all of these other religions that, we possess and that, people can belong to and so forth like that. But people can believe anything they want. And adolescence is a period of time of self-exploration. So when you're talking about self-exploration, you're talking about finding their own belief systems that caters to them. It doesn't need to follow the parents anymore. It may or it may not, but they need to find themselves. And then once that's said during adulthood, they can still change that too. They can explore other religion and other belief systems. But at this time, that's part of growing up. So emerging adults in less developed countries are more likely to be religious than their counterparts in developed countries like the US, the UK, France, Canada, and all of these other westernized countries. Because there's an imposition that people need to be more traditional and follow the family's belief systems and so forth. And it could be well true in the US as well. But again, when you're looking at what you see in the media, what you see in the movies, what you hear about these things and so forth, yeah, statistics says that maybe there is a slight decrease in affiliation of adolescents with religion at this point. So again, the next chart on religious and spiritual development emphasizes this. The charts tells you that by age, by the time they hit 18 and 20, it's a slow decline, and it kind of tapers off by the time they're 24. So again, this is based on analysis and statistical data, based on, a few studies. So, cognitive development and religion in adolescence. More so than in childhood, adolescents think abstractly, idealistically, and logically. So this is where they start questioning things. Is there a God? Do I need to believe the same belief system as my parents? What if I choose another religion, another belief system? There's always questions because not only is their mind more open to information, especially in social media and other medias, their peers also challenges them. A lot of the time, peer groups tend to have similar religious affiliations and belief systems as well. So that's also a good influence, or maybe a bad, but it doesn't matter. There's no morality to that. It's a belief system that they're attracted to. The increase in abstract thinking let adolescents consider various ideas about religion and spiritual concepts, and I think I just said that. Increased idealistic thinking provides a foundation for considering a religion's role in a better world. The world has gotten smaller with social media. They can see what other people's beliefs are in different parts of the planet, what works, what doesn't work, and it opens their eyes for the first time. 20, 30, 40 years ago, the world was much, bigger but we had less contact with these other, peer groups of the same age that we had as adolescents ourselves, so that we had no information and no perspective of how they believe and how they function. But now it's different because of what we have in social media. So an increased capacity for logical reasoning enables them to develop hypotheses and sort through answers to spiritual questions. And again, I just kind of stated that. So again, looking for answers. And everybody does that. Even adults do this. We are constantly looking for answers. What is the meaning of religion? What is the meaning of life? What is my existence? These are existential questions that sometimes the adolescent starts looking forward to looking for answers. And it's a lifelong journey through adulthood that we're looking for some existential answers to our existential questions. Why am I here? What's my purpose? All of these things. But the adolescence is the beginning stage of that. So, the positive role of religion in adolescent lives. Religion plays a role in adolescents' health, more of a mental health. How many adolescent clients have I had encountered, throughout my career where religion serves as a basis for their mental health. If things are going wrong in their life, prayers are the answer to their, questions, to their, instability in their relationships, in their lives, academics, work, whatever. Okay. And has influence on whether they engage in problem behaviors. Research links religiosity or spirituality to a decreased likelihood of engaging in substance use and to positive health outcomes. Religion, for the most part, serves a purpose. And one of the purpose of religion, not just spirituality, is very similar to what I just talked about before. It provides structure. It provides guidance. It provides rules of how we live our day-to-day life. Think about it from a Christian perspective or a Catholic perspective or a Buddhist perspective or a Protestant perspective, whatever else your belief system could be. Look at the rules in that religion. Look at the functionality of what it keeps us, the parameters that keeps our behaviors intact within to conform. How to be a good citizen, how to be a good Christian, how to be a good Protestant, how to be a good Buddhist. It conforms to the greater society of the same people with the same followers. So in fact, religion serves a good purpose for us. For some people, it may even have more positive than negative. So in one study, spirituality, but not religiously, was linked to higher life satisfaction. Because it serves that purpose. It gives us the answers that science may not be able to answer. It gives us the answers that a lot of the other things that we're looking for in life cannot provide the answer. So a lot of the time, it gives us the answer. It may or may not be true, but still, it's an answer more so than having no answer at all. So many religious adolescents adopt their religion's message about caring and concern for people, increased likelihood of engaging in community service. So what if you're seeing an adolescent client with behavioral problems in a juvenile facility? They're acting out, people just see the behavior and so forth like that. A lot of the media and movies don't portray this. Then when we're doing assessment of the same people, the same adolescent with behavioral problems, we go in depth talking about religion and their spiritual beliefs. And it doesn't need to be a pastor or an imam or a rabbi or a priest to talk to these people. We can ask the same questions because belief system lies at the heart of their cognition, their emotions, their behavior. So we need to start questioning that. Because, society only sees this juvenile as acting out, as burglary, as a crime, or assault, or stealing, or whatever. We need to explore the in-depth stages of this adolescent. Because we need to look at not because why they did it, In CBT, we talk about this all the time. We don't care about why in CBT. Nobody cares about why in CBT. We're more concerned with how the behavioral dysfunction can be corrected in a short amount of time. So again, the community service serves as a purpose to say, hey, you know what? When you're putting someone out there in blast, especially an adolescent, whose ego is very fragile, so we're looking at damaging that ego or putting him to shame. Isn't that what prison is supposed to do? Isn't that what community service is supposed to do? Is put this person in shame so that they're never going to do the same negative behavior with the negative outcome? Isn't that the previous purpose before? Is it working? Is it not working? In my point of view, having worked with these individuals, a lot of the time it doesn't work because there's no shame. Okay, they're not ashamed to do the same negative behaviors anymore because there's no shame, because society has deemed it acceptable. We're just going to go through it. So again, part of the reason why we see these people in doing assessment and diagnosis and treatment is that we have to look at their sense of shame. And again, we're going to talk about this in other classes as well, but this is just development. So moving on to families, when we're talking about topics such as parental monitoring and information management, every time you see an adolescent, remember that this is a person below the age of 18. So when you're thinking about the person below age 18, this person is under a guidance or guardianship of a parent or parents or a guardian. So we need to get them involved. So your individual assessment and therapy will be coupled with family therapy. It's important because we need to have more information about this person's, this adolescent's, history, their family history, and we can uncover issues such as abuse and neglect and trauma and all of these other things. So don't automatically assume that the adolescent is going to be fully cooperative with you giving all that information. Sometimes we have to get it from the parents or the guardian. With families, there's also a sense of autonomy and attachment. So we're going to talk about that too. And parent-adolescent conflict or relationships. So let's talk about that too. So parental monitoring and information. So I just kind of touch base on that a little bit. So when we're talking about supervising adolescents' choice of social settings, activities, and friends, why do they get involved in again? What does their social circle look like? What does their social media look like? What are their activities? Are they the kind of individuals, who keeps cutting school? Or are they, very good kids, with good grades and all of that just made a mistake? So when you're looking at it from that perspective, you're looking for those history. So it's important to uncover those things, right? And supervising academic effort. Not only do you have the parents involved, you're going to get involved with teachers and assistant principals and principals and all of that. We need to get their academic records because we want to know how they were doing in school, because most teenagers in this country are in school. So what is their academic looks like? What is their grade to grade behavior look like from the school's perspective? Higher level of monitoring and rule enforcement are linked to engaging later in sex and using condom. Is that an appropriate behavior? Or at 14, they already had sexual partners because there's poor parental monitoring. So what are we looking for here? So what about sleep pattern, eating pattern? Every time that you're going to assess for sleep, you should be assessing for appetite pattern because those two go hand in hand. So are they getting adequate sleep? Are they not getting sleep at all? Because maybe they're going to school and they're working and then they get home and taking care of their younger siblings and all of that, and they don't have time at all to sleep. Because the mom is always, working as well, and the father is, not in the family, not in the picture. So what are we looking for? What does the family look like? What is the family dynamic and a family structure? So you're looking for every little thing. Because remember, what are we looking for here? We're looking for the adolescent's relationship with others and the relationship with the adolescent with himself or herself. So that's important rules. The rule of thumb here is we're looking for different relationships. Better health behavior in adolescence and college. What is their purpose? What is their goals? What do they want to be? What are those little things that they're thinking about, but they don't have the answer for it yet? And they don't want to be solidified with the answer, because a lot of the time these adolescents don't have the answer anyway. But they may see you as a person who's going to guide them through it. They may be linked with a guidance counselor in school, in high school. Who knows? But it's good for us to check it out anyway, to make sure that we get those answers, because the adolescence is always looking for those answers through questions. So current interest focuses on the adolescent's management of their parents' access to information. So this is where that tie between independence and codependency, begins in the adolescent. And as children, we're primarily codependent. And as adults, we have that more independence and codependency as well. But in teenager, they're having to look for that balance because they don't know yet how much they need from others, including themselves. So disclosing or concealing information about their activity. If you ask an adolescent, how many of you have gone through this yourself, and how many of you know adolescents from your own families? To say, I don't know. That's your typical response. I don't know. I'm not telling you. I don't know. Right? So because they're trying to conceal activities, because they're trying to find that sense of independence that has a purpose, because their peers are doing the same exact thing. So privacy to their phones is a must. Okay, parents wants to know what they're doing. Are they doing drugs? Are they drinking? Are they, having sexual intercourse and all of these other questions from a parent's point of view? Remember, the parent's point of view is an adult perspective. These parents were also adolescents at one point. But now they're dealing with their teenagers who's having problems, who's in therapy with you. So when you're dealing with this, they have the tendency to conceal this information, even though that it could be good or bad. They don't know. They're trying to figure that out. So when parents engage in positive parenting practices, adolescents are more likely to disclose information because they have a good relationship, a good pairing with the parent or parents. So they're more open to that. This disclosure is linked to positive adolescent adjustment because the parent serves as a good, positive role model. So now it's the opposite of those people you may see in juvenile halls if you ever want to work with adolescents or in the community. Adolescents who engage in problem behavior are more secretive and disclose less to parents. They don't want to tell the parents. And the parents could be pushy. They could be abusive. They could be, breaking boundaries, breaking into their rooms, breaking into their phones, and all of these other things. So that's not a good positive role model at all, because the parents have lost the trust of the adolescent child or children that they have. So it's important to look for those history within the family. Lower level managerial parenting may result in teens or adolescents seeking identity coalition with peers, other individuals, even gangs, because they've lost the trust of the parent who violated that trust, that sacred trust. So now they're going to revert to peers because they think that peers will understand them because of the same mentality, the same age group, the same values. Earlier sexual behavior. So there's nothing. Again, it depends on the individual adolescent. Some will start having sex at 14, while others will wait until 17 or maybe even later than that. So what are those early sexual behaviors? So it's a good idea as a psychologist yourself to take into consideration doing a sexual history for every adolescent patient that you're ever going to have. A sexual history is much more comprehensive because you're going to be asking specific sexual questions towards an adolescent who may or may not volunteer such information, to you. Remember, they're not seeing you as an adolescent peer. You're not friends with these adolescent clients. You are, a few years older. You're seeing as a psychologist. You have an authority. So therefore, they may not trust you fully, and they may not give you the answers you're looking for when you're asking about this sexual history. Withdrawing from parent-child relationship. In California, what is the age? If anybody knows this, I'm going to ask anyway. What is the age of consent for a child to have individual therapy with a psychologist or any therapist in the state of California? The answer is 12. That means 12 and above, they don't need to tell their parents. They don't need to give consent about what's happening in their therapy, from a psychologist, you know, that the parents need to know what's going on in therapy because of that state law. So it's important to note, even state law, that the child who's 12 and above, 12 to 16, 12 to 18, okay, can have therapy with you and not have the information disclosed to the parent or parents. Lower academic performance. What's school going to be like? Are they failing? Are they doing great? Is this a one-time deal? Is this repetitive detention, suspension? What are we talking about here? So you need to get with the school, and get an ROI, release of information, so that you know, because you're putting kind of like a puzzle with an adolescent. Their work habits, their family history, their peer relationship, their social media, their school and all of these academics and so forth. You're putting a puzzle together to get a bigger picture of what this adolescent client is all about. That's your job as a psychologist. Increased mood problems. And again, we can't say enough of this. Adolescence is a stage of development, physical development. They have growth spurts. Their brain is growing bigger. Okay? They're learning more information. Okay? So also at the same time, they're trying to manage their mood, which they don't understand in the very beginning, and they may not understand it. It just happens. Also at the same time, there's that adolescent breakthrough, to say, hey, you know what? For girls, they're having the menopause period and all of that. For boys, that growth spurt of hormones that's acting up. Suddenly they're having body odor. And suddenly, they're having, chest hairs and facial hairs, and they don't understand that they used to be children. They didn't have this. Now they have it. So they're changing physically, but their mood is also changing because they're trying to understand what's happening with each mood. And moods are emotions that are distinct. There's negative and positive. And a lot of the time, there's confusion about moods. They're not understanding what anger is and anxiety is. And to them, it's the same thing. What about guilt and shame? And regret? Again, there's a lot of confusion about understanding each emotion. And again, as adults, we take these things for granted. But the thing is, it's about that stage of understanding these things, but in a state of confusion. That's important for us to recognize where the adolescent is at. So, in moving forward with this, autonomy and attachment. Parents must weigh competing needs for autonomy and control, for independence and connection. As parents, we want to keep them as kids forever. It's not going to happen. They're going to grow up. They're going to create their own identity. They're going to create their own relationship and independence and move on and become parents themselves in the near future. But the thing is, as parents, we went through that ourselves. So the push for autonomy may puzzle and frustrate parents because they want to keep it under control, but there's that sense of breakthrough and independence to say, I need to be my own self. So we're going to do what we need to do as parents, but there are parents out there you will encounter that don't want this issue at all. They want to keep their children, their adolescents as children, as long as possible. And there's that conflict. So adolescents often have a strong desire to make their own decision and to spend more time with friends. You're out there 16 hours a day, you come home, and you barely said hi, and you go back to your room, and then it goes on for the next few days. And parents are like, what happened to my child? What happened to family dinner? What happened to us talking about how school went and all of these things? Because they're spending more time with friends than the family and the parents themselves. So we also, in part, have to educate the parents and the families about these outbursts. And the outbursts could actually be normal. So the parents may see it as negative. We see more of it as both positive and negative, more neutral. Adolescents' ability to attain autonomy is acquired through appropriate adult reaction to their desire for control. And when given autonomy, teens feel that they have more independence and a better parental relationship. So it's all about the teenager's relationship with the parents or parent. So is it good or is it negative or bad? So, or somewhere in between. So that depends on that relationship. How they seek out relationship with others, their peers, is going to depend on what experience they've had and their relationship with their parents in the very beginning. So we need to acknowledge that. Boys are typically more independent, okay, society-wise. And how do we see girls? Oh, they're more interdependent. Not so much codependent, more interdependent. Okay, because they will also seek out other peers themselves. But there are differences when it comes to boys and girls. Okay, and there's a lot of myths out there, that girls will be more emotionally more advanced than boys at a certain age, like 14, 15, 16, which could be partly true. But at the same time, somewhere along the line, they will both catch up and be even. Okay? But the thing is, boys have a different way of connecting with others in adolescent stage than girls do. Okay? Even though that we want to put them all in one group as an adolescent, it doesn't work that way because gender and biology plays a role in this. So it's important for us to acknowledge that boys and girls have different social relationship, even though they have boy and girl friends. Well, a lot of the time when they're spending a lot of time with the same gender, their social relationships could be partly different as well. So cultural diversity in timing and rules must also be considered. So culture is always considered at every point of development. The role of attachment. Securely attached adolescents are less likely to have emotional difficulties and to engage in problem behaviors, juvenile delinquency, and drug abuse, including alcoholism. So studies have showed us this. The media and movies have shown us this. The more emotionally stable the adolescent is, it's because of the origin or the family origin they're coming from, because that serves as a role model to them. Remember that even though the adolescent is an individual who seeks out independence, they're still very interdependent with their parents, with their family. They go back home and seek their guidance at some level. So it's not necessarily that they abandon the family and just seek out friends. They're trying to balance those relationships between friends, how much to spend in a given hour in a given day, and also with families that they have to go home to. The ones with problems are the ones that have dysfunctional and fragmented families. Because there's no rules. There's very little rules. Okay? So the ones that I've encountered, their parents are also drug addicts because they get into drug addictions and alcoholics and abusives and all of these things. And again, the question to the juvenile is, who wants to go back to that kind of a family, right? So we look for that family history. So balancing the freedom and control. Adolescents still need to stay connected with their family. For example, those who do not eat with a parent on most days have higher rates of substance use. Checking in with the parents on a daily basis or every few days is a really good thing to do because it serves time to balance to say whatever things are happening out there with their peers and in society and in school, they often bring those things and report that to the family. And that's kind of why one of the first questions I ask with adolescents is, especially doing family therapy, is what is family dinner like? Think about that. What is family dinner like for your family on a day-to-day basis, on weekends? Because that's the time when adolescents reconnect with families, their siblings, older or younger, with parent or parents, and just kind of review the week-to-week, the day-to-day activities that's happened out there. They bring those reports back into the family. So it's important to figure out what those things are like in their experiences. And a high monitoring, high autonomy support parenting profile is positively linked to adolescent adjustment. It's a given. We know this. Parent-adolescent conflict increases in early adolescence, but much of it involves the everyday events of family life. There it is. Okay? It says so right there. Rarely major dilemmas. Such conflict may serve as a positive development function by facilitating the transition to greater autonomy. Adolescents, not only because they learn from social media and their friends, The first influencer in their life is who? The parents. The parents are their influencer. If it's a good, positive role model, most likely they will copy that because it's a good reflection of who they are. And then they'll also copy that with their social peers. So you'll also see that the more, with some dysfunction, adolescents will seek out other adolescents with other dysfunction. And a good, stable adolescent will seek out other, also good, stable adolescent as their peer group. So we know it's a given. Okay? It's a formula for, for success or failure. So parents are important attachment figures and support system while adolescents explore a more complex social world. When conflict is prolonged and intense, it is associated with various problems, and many of them are serious. And we'll be talking about this. I've given several examples about this. That the problems inherent in a family are typically the problems that the adolescent go through with their social peers, because they rely on those peers to validate those experiences, and their perspectives and perceptions. Some conflict is especially likely between immigrant parents and adolescent, especially if there are multi-generational in the family, okay, acculturation issues. So you have immigrant parents who may or may not speak English, and then the adolescent child is born here who speaks English or maybe bilingual, but they have a different way of looking at society, looking at the community, looking at growing here versus the immigrant parents who grew up at another country, at another culture. So again, looking at the dynamics of the family history is important because it gives us the values of what's wrong in the present time. So we're going to cover now friendships, peer groups, and dating and romantic relationships. So with friendships, most teens prefer a small number of friendships that are close ties to them. They're more intense, more intimate. So think about your best friends. Because you have a small group of best friends, and then you have friends outside of that, and then you have a larger social circle that may be termed as acquaintances. That, that's even larger than outside of that circle. So you have several circles that you operate from. It's the same thing with the adolescent. So it's important for us to acknowledge that these friendships do exist in different forms and at different levels. Friends become increasingly important in meeting social needs. It's a must. Okay, human beings are not built to exist alone. We are social animals. Okay, and social media has its positive and negative qualities. It made us bring us closer together as a society, as a community, as a planet. But at the same time, it also has negative values to it. And I'm not going to talk much about that. Okay? Developmental advantages occur when friends are socially skilled, supportive, oriented towards academic achievement. So think about the friends that you have and the friends that adolescents have. Okay? Do you think that an adolescent, from a lower economic, socioeconomic community will hang out with the rich kids? What do they have in common? Right? Are they both equally skilled in certain aspects? So teenagers in the very beginning form their social circles based on the same values, the same skill sets, the same supportiveness, the same orientation towards, like maybe, they're oriented towards work. It doesn't have to be academics. So on the opposite side of that is developmentally disadvantages are more likely with coercive friends who encourage drinking. They're into drugs. Of course they're going to go through that. And they still have to make a decision to say, do I really want to go through that with my friends? But they're my friends. And they start developing an identity with themselves as part of that social circle. So it's important to acknowledge that this identity is still growing, but it's manifested through the social circle. So if you have a group of alcoholics and drug dealers and drug addicts, of course they have a tendency to kind of vacillate towards that. Conflict-ridden, poor quality friendship. So A lot of the time, the same friends have the same exact or similar family dynamics. So that's something that we should ask the adolescent clients also in therapy. So again, the next figure 4, developmental change in self-disclosing conversation, speaks volumes of the data. And you can just look at this. Social media per peer group and peer relations. 5 ways social media use transforms adolescent peer relationship, changing the frequency or immediacy of their experience. So think about how many friends do they have in their phones? How often do they connect with the smallest intimate circle? You could even go as far as asking, well, when you text your friends, your best friends, how long does it take for them to respond? So is it a matter of seconds, a matter of minutes, maybe days? The closer knit that they have with their adolescent social circle, studies have shown us the faster they respond to each other. We're talking about in seconds, if not minutes. Whereas the more detached or the social circle is, the more that they may take their time responding to those individuals. So again, it depends on the hierarchy of sociality within that social circle, amplifying their experiences and demands. Their parents may not have the answers to their questions about life, about sex, but their peers may. So how do they amplify their experience? Because they're getting validation from those social circles, their friends, to say, hey, this is what I did that worked for me, and maybe you should do the same. So that's how they get their experiences, is through validation, altering the qualitative aspects of their interactions. So again, how many times do they interact per day, per friend? Who's their closest confidant? So that speaks volumes of that. Facilitating new opportunities for their compensatory behavior. Okay, so a lot of the time, these adolescents with the same social values egg each other on to say, hey, let's go out, let's have the similar experiences, let's go on trips, let's go on, vacations, let's go on movies and all of these things. They have similar activities and similar habits and similar likes and dislikes, and creating completely novel behavior. Adolescence is a time of experiment. They want to experience something new. They want to make themselves separate from the last generation. Their generation is the best, better than their parents. So they want to show an impact to society, in the world, that their experiences are unique to them, to their generation. We're talking about what we have right now is Gen Z. Before that, Millennial. Before that, Gen X. And now we have Gen A. So each generation is special in its own way. Peer groups, peer pressure. Young adolescents conform more to peer standards than children. There is that pressure, that social pressure, that need to conform because they want to get accepted. Who doesn't want to get accepted, right? Who wants to be alone, right? Everybody wants to be a part of a social circle, whatever that circle could be. Boys are more influenced by peer pressure involving sexual behavior than girls. There is a need. Remember that adolescence is the stage of hormones and adrenaline and high sexual drive and experimentations and all of these things. So again, it's only natural, because each generation has gone through this, that this is also partly biological. Bragging rights, machismo effect, higher testosterone, So again, it's more open now than ever to say, they're exchanging body counts. And again, that's a very infamous, topic now amongst young adults and adolescents. What is your body count? How many people have you had sex and all of these things? And it seems to be a bragging right these days. And machismo effect for boys. I did this and I did the cheerleader and all of these things. So again, it's bragging rights and all of these things. And again, it depends on the perspective also. It doesn't have to be negative all the time. It could be positive. But the thing is, what was that like for that adolescent client? And adolescents with low self-esteem and high social anxiety are most likely to conform to peers during transitions, for example, a new school. So there's going to be evidence that, Parents will move and relocate based on job transfers and whatever else. And adolescents are tagging along with that, and they're going to be changing schools. So again, adaptation, resiliency is part of something that we have to assess for. Cliques and crowds. A clique is a small group of about 5 or 6, or maybe more, that may form among adolescents who engage in similar activities. So basically, these are their closest confidant, their closest friends. May also form because of friendship or because of activities. It depends. And a crowd is a larger group structure that's usually based on reputation. Members may or may not spend much time together. Most are defined by activities an adolescent engage in. They're jocks, they're druggies, they're football players, they're basketball groupies, whatever else that could be that they term. It's a much larger crowd. It doesn't mean that they're really socially intimately close, but they're part of the crowd, and they're part of that social crowd that everyone wants to belong to. So it's important to ask those questions. And of course, we're talking about the appearance of COVID in December 2020, which literally hampered a lot of adolescent growth because everybody stayed home. The social distancing, maintaining a distance of 6 feet. You all know about this. You went through this yourself. In this respect, the dramatic increase in social media use was heightened 1,000%, 4,000%. Proved to be of greater value because adolescents needed to stay in contact with their friends and their peers through social media, even though the physicality does not exist. And when social media, when the COVID was over, adolescents kept that on and maintained that relationship online, even though that the physical distance is no longer the 6 feet and so forth. We can hug, we can shake hands, and all of these other things. So, dating and romantic relationships. Developmental changes in dating and romantic relationships. The 3 stages that characterizes this. Entry into romantic attraction and affiliation at about 11 or 13. This is when the biology, starts kicking in. Like feelings change, body changes, hormones changes, okay? Even bodily smell changes and all of these things. So about between 11 and 13 is when it starts hitting. And then exploring romantic relationship at about approximately 14 to 16, because now they have social groups and then they get to be introduced to friends and other friends and so forth. And they get to start knowing who they like and what they like, with the opposite partner and so forth. And they start doing that social dating and so forth like that. So a lot of the time, most activities are done in social groups, not individual, because a lot of that connection is there. And then consolidating the dyadic romantic bonds as they get older, moving into early adulthood from 17 to 19 years of age. That's when they start separating from the group, even though they're still part of a group, separating to say, hey, we're monogamous to each other, and we're not going to date other people and so forth, and it's just the 2 of us. So again, it's part of that growth, that independent growth, but also interdependence growth towards forming relationships with others away from the parents now, away from the family. So 2 variations called early bloomers and late bloomers, and I think you understand what that means. But there's also a variation when it comes to sexual orientation, like dating in gay and lesbian youth. Many date other sex peers, which can help clarify their sexual orientation or disguise it from others. So the relationship that people form during adolescence help greatly in their own experiences as gay and lesbian youth. And again, we want to include also the transgender individuals within that evolves from adolescence to early adulthood. And most gay and lesbian youth have had some same-sex experience, often with peers who are experimenting. So again, this is part of that social circle. But in the social-cultural context in dating, cultures, values, beliefs, and traditions often dictate the age at which dating begins, how much freedom is allowed, whether dates must be chaperoned, and the roles of males and females. Now, the book kind of still talks about this in a more traditional way. But the ones that you're going to see out here now, think about what are the rules in dating? as an adolescent. That could be very different from the rules in dating as an early adult or a middle-aged adult. So what are the rules? Is it spoken? Is it unspoken? Is it implied? Is it the rules within the social group itself? So what are those rules? And where do you think they're going to learn that? Within the social group that they are operating from. These adolescents within adolescent groups. So that's kind of where it's going to start. Okay? But what are those beliefs? There's values, there's cultures, traditions, and the rules. Dating can be a source of conflict in families, especially if parents grew up in a culture where little freedom is allowed. When it's very restricted and constricted, like dating's not allowed. You're not allowed to go on a date until you're 18. Well, everybody else in their peer group is dating at 14, 15, 16. So it's going to cause conflict with that adolescent teenager with the parents because they're abiding by the cultural traditions, whereas, again, bicultural values plays a huge role in this. So again, you need to know where the teenager's operating from and where the parents and family is operating from, because it's important to recognize that, because sometimes that misunderstanding of the rules and traditions is not specific to being translated to the teenager, or often misconstrued by the teenager to say, no one's ever explained to me this. It was just implied that this is our culture, this is the religion we follow, and I have to follow that. So a lot of the time, these teenagers will conflict, will rebel with their parents, and that's where the conflict really starts. So experiencing romantic encounters can increase social acceptance, friendship competence, and romantic competence. So the more stable they are in their personality, the more that they're going to have the social acceptance, because it's going to be based on stability with the parents and stability within the social peers groups that they operate from. Supportive romantic relationships can improve the likelihood of positive outcomes for adolescents experiencing conflicts in other parts of their life. The more stable the relationship that one has within the social group, within the dating with other adolescents as well, the more that they will be able to function with other stressful situations in their life. Because that support mechanism, the support network that they function within and from, is going to serve as a backbone to a lot of these adolescents as they move towards adulthood. So, having more romantic relationships can also have that negative implication. Higher levels of sexual use, delinquency in sexual behavior. We talk about this in psychology. There are papers about losing pair bonding. The more sexual partners you have in your life, the more that you're not going to have, or you will have difficulty having a long-term attachment to one partner, because there's trauma involved. There's likelihood that the next person that you're coming across will be that long-term partner, because you may or may not see that the next person you're going to have a sexual relationship as just having sex and no romantic relationship at all. So in girls, depression and pregnancy may be the outcome of that. In boys, could be anxiety and depression, okay, as well. So boys are not as immune as girls. They're equally, affected by these conditions. So, cross-cultural comparison in terms of other topics, ethnicity, and the media. We've been talking about the media, but I just want to cover a little bit more of this, and we're almost done. So, depending on the culture, adolescents may involve many cultural or different experiences. Health. Fewer adolescents die from infectious disease and malnutrition these days. We are at the top of our field at this time in terms of immunizations, in terms of eating good, healthy habits, in terms of good food and nutrition and all of these other things. So I think, we minimize that. But again, there are still other things that could be considered as a factor. Car accidents, motor vehicle accidents, motorcycles, okay, suicide because, for whatever reason, abuse issues, traumatized, and all of these things. So again, there's other ways a person can suffer and be traumatized and even die. So gender, the experiences of male and female adolescents continue to be quite different. In much of the world, males have greater access to education, a variety of careers and leisure activities. It's the same thing for women too, but greater access here for males and females in our country. In other countries, they place more emphasis with males over females. So far more restrictions are placed on the sexual activity of adolescent females than that of males. And differences are narrowing over time, however, in other countries, but in this country it's much more equal or similar as close as possible, and more opportunities than other countries, as I said. Families and other countries, if you're encountering adolescents who are immigrants from other countries as well, families are close-knit and have extended kin network. So when you're dealing with individuals, you have to expand that. Individual, then families, and then extended families. But current trends of mobility and migration are bringing change. Countries like the US are seeing a greater number of divorced families and step families. There are integrated families, hybrid families, if you want to call that an older term. So again, what is that like? When you have two separate families and the parents merge into making one big family. Peers, in some regions, peer relations are restricted, especially for girls. In others, peer network can serve as surrogate families. And think about how social media made this connection much more closer. So even though there are different parts of the world, there are adolescents, but even though there are different parts of the country which may have more or less restriction, they're also part of the social media which made connection much more easier. Okay? And there's always going to be comparison, by the way. Adolescents compare each other all the time. So it's like, what's your family like, and what's my family like, and are you middle class, and I'm lower class, or I'm rich, and all of these things. There's always comparison, okay? So it's not so much who's better. It's about just getting a perspective that other families are not the same as their own family. So activities U.S. adolescents have far more discretionary time than adolescents in other industrialized countries. There are other countries out there, doesn't matter if it's Europe or Asia or Africa or Latin America, that they spend more time in school than our adolescents here. Okay? So again, there's a difference in how culture is manifested by society, how adolescents are supposed to function. When given a choice, they typically engage in unchallenging activities such as hanging out and watching TV, because it's a distressing kind of activity. We just want to hang out, relax, have fun, laugh, eat, popcorn, candy, whatever, and just watch TV and binge. So it happens. And again, we're close to kind of finishing this. So rites of passage. Some society have elaborate ceremonies that signal the adolescent's move to maturity and achievement of adult status, known as a rite of passage. What is the rite of passage? You can ask the adolescent this. A lot of families don't have this. And some families do. Some more traditional families have this, especially with a religious set of belief system, like for Jewish, religion, or even Buddhism. What is that rite of passage that families go through with adolescents? For Hispanics, a lot of Hispanic families or Latinx, the quinceañera, right? And some families may not have it at all. That is formal or informal. So what is that? Ask anyway. And it's characterized by some form of ritual death and rebirth. American culture does not have a universal ceremony because we are a multicultural society composed of different religions and different cultures built within. So there's not one standard that everybody has to follow. Okay? But again, the Jewish bar mitzvah, a bar and bar mitzvah, and the Catholic confirmation, school graduation is a ceremonial from grade school to often junior high, but especially high school to college. That's a big graduation and a rite of passage. Or from college graduation to now you're a mature adult. So what are those culture like? And we want to ask those things because a lot of the time it's important not only to the adolescent, it's also equally as or more important to the family, because it's a continuation of tradition that is built within the family itself. So I am going to pause here for a second and take another quick break. All right, we're back. So this is the end of the week 6 lecture, audio lecture. So just a reminder again that the PowerPoint will be attached to this audio file, and please view it at your leisure. We will not have a class on week 6, so this is up to you to hear this lecture and also do your discussion post and or assignment for the week. And I hope to see you all in class in week 8. All right, take care, be safe, and let me know if you have any questions. Bye-bye.